Hello, my name is Kevin Lee, 36 years old, currently the president of MedTech Solutions, a medical technology conglomerate valued at over $1 billion, headquartered in San Diego, California. If you look at me now, sitting in a gleaming glass office with a view of the Pacific Ocean, you might think I'm a successful man, someone who has conquered everything. But if you knew what I've been through, the scars that never heal in my heart, you'd understand that the path that led me here was far from rosy. It was a journey filled with blood, tears, and sleepless nights, where memories of my childhood cut into my heart like blades. Today I'll tell you my story, starting from the darkest days when I was just a boy living in fear and self-doubt, under the heavy shadow of the man I once called my father. I was born in a magnificent villa in La Jolla, where towering palm trees and winding roads along the coast left everyone in awe. But that glamorous beauty was merely a facade for a broken family. My father, John Lee, was the founder of MedTech Solutions, a medical technology company that was small but ambitious at the time. He was a tall man with sharp features and cold, piercing eyes that always made others feel small. To the outside world, he was a brilliant entrepreneur, a model man. But to me, he was a nightmare. I still vividly remember the first night I realized I didn't belong in his world. I was 6 years old, curled up on the wooden staircase leading to the living room, where the glittering chandelier cast light on expensive wine bottles on the table. My father, drunk, pointed at me and roared, "You bastard! You're not my son!" His voice echoed, sharp as a knife, making me tremble. I didn't understand what bastard meant, but the way he looked at me, full of contempt and hatred, shattered my young heart. My mother, Elizabeth, rushed over, pulling me into her arms, whispering, "Don't listen to him, my love. You're everything to me." But her comforting words couldn't erase the pain. Those words, like a curse, clung to me for years to come. My mother was the only light in the darkness of my childhood. She was a gentle woman with golden blonde hair and a smile as warm as the sun. She always found ways to protect me, even if it meant standing up to my father. I remember the nights she snuck into my room after my father had passed out drunk on the sofa. She sat by my bed, stroking my hair, telling stories of adventures from books, of heroes who overcame adversity. "You're stronger than you think, Kevin," she said. "One day you'll do great things." I clung to those words like a lifeline, but deep down, I still felt like a worthless failure, unworthy of her love. There was another person in our household, my younger brother, Ryan. Ryan was 4 years younger than me, and from the moment he was born, he was the center of attention. Ryan had my father's blue eyes, a charming smile, and a confidence I could never muster. My father loved Ryan blindly, as if he were the embodiment of every dream my father ever had. Ryan was given expensive toys, taken on trips around the world, while I was often left behind with the excuse that you need to study harder. I wasn't exactly jealous of Ryan, not entirely. I just wished my father would look at me with different eyes, not ones filled with disdain. Ryan, spoiled excessively by our parents, gradually became an arrogant boy. He called me weirdo when I buried myself in homework, laughed at me when I fell off my bike, and even once tore my favorite book to pieces in front of me. "You think you're smarter than me?" he once said, his tone full of defiance. I didn't respond, just lowered my head, trying to hide my tears. My mother always tried to mediate, but Ryan knew he had our father's backing, which made him even more brazen. My father's beatings were what I feared most. He didn't hit me often, but when he did, it felt like my entire world collapsed. Once, when I accidentally broke an expensive crystal glass during a company party, he dragged me into his study and slammed the door shut. "Who do you think you are, embarrassing me like that?" he bellowed before delivering a slap so hard it knocked me to the floor. My cheek burned, but what hurt more was his gaze, as if I wasn't human, just something to be despised. My mother rushed in, screaming for him to stop, but he shoved her aside and continued berating me. After those incidents, my mother would hold me tightly, her tears falling into my hair. I'm sorry, Kevin. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better. I began to wonder what I had done wrong. Why did my father hate me so much? Why did he call me a bastard? Those questions gnawed at my mind, plunging me into persistent self-doubt. I started to believe I truly wasn't worthy, that perhaps I was a mistake, a stain on my father's perfect family. But my mother never let me sink too deep into those thoughts. She taught me how to stand up, how to find joy in studying, in books, in the dreams I quietly nurtured. You don't need to be like anyone else, she said. Just be yourself, and you'll find your own path. Studying became my refuge. I immersed myself in books, numbers, and assignments as if they were the only way to prove my worth. I excelled, always at the top of my class, but that was never enough to please my father. "What's the point of good grades?" he once said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Ryan's the one who'll inherit this company." Those words stabbed my heart like a knife, but I didn't give up. I wanted to prove to him that I wasn't useless. More than that, I wanted to make my mother proud. When I was 14, a major incident occurred. Ryan, then only 10, caused a scene at his birthday party. He threw cake at an important company guest, infuriating my father. But instead of blaming Ryan, my father turned his anger on me. "Why didn't you keep an eye on him?" he shouted before slapping me in the living room in front of dozens of onlookers. I stood there, my face burning, tears welling up, but I didn't cry. Not because I was strong, but because I had learned to hide my emotions. My mother pulled me out of the room, holding me close. "You won't have to endure this forever," she whispered. "One day you'll get out of here." Her words were like a promise, a faint glimmer of hope in my heart. I began to dream of a future where I no longer lived under my father's shadow, where I could be myself without fear of being beaten or humiliated. But I didn't know that just a few years later a greater loss would strike, taking away the only light in my life and thrusting me into a journey filled with pain but also resilience. When I turned 15, I had learned how to survive in that cold, unwelcoming house. I no longer sought my father's approval, nor did I hold out hope that Ryan would stop treating me like an outsider. Instead, I poured all my energy into studying. Books, numbers, and lengthy essays became my safe haven. Every A grade, every word of praise from a teacher was a brick in the wall I built to shield myself from my father's insults. I wasn't just studying to escape La Jolla. I was studying to prove to myself that I wasn't the bastard he had called me. My high school was a cutthroat environment where the children of San Diego's wealthy elite competed to outshine one another. I had no close friends, not because I didn't want any, but because I didn't know how to fit in. The other kids bragged about their European vacations or the shiny new cars their parents bought them. I had only tattered library books and quiet dreams of one day leaving it all behind. But that loneliness shaped me. I learned to be self-reliant, to stand on my own, and to turn pain into motivation. My mother was the only one who truly understood me. She frequently came to school, attending award ceremonies that my father never bothered to show up for. I remember one afternoon when I received the Outstanding Student Award for my grade. My mother stood up, clapping, her eyes sparkling with pride. After the ceremony, she took me to a small seaside ice cream shop. "You make me so proud, Kevin," she said, squeezing my hand tightly. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you're not good enough." Those rare moments were like medicine, giving me the strength to keep going. When I was 17, I applied to Harvard, barely daring to hope. It was my biggest dream, but also a gamble. My father scoffed when he heard about my Harvard aspirations. "You think you're good enough for that place?" he sneered. "Don't embarrass me." Ryan, by then a rebellious teenager, just chuckled and said, "If you get into Harvard, I'll walk barefoot to the moon." But my mother believed in me. She helped me prepare my application, read every essay, and edited every sentence. "You deserve this, Kevin," she said. "You'll make it." The day the acceptance letter from Harvard arrived, I could hardly bring myself to open the envelope. I sat in my room, hands trembling, heart pounding. When I read the words, "Congratulations, Kevin Lee, you have been accepted," I burst into tears. Not out of joy, but out of relief. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had worth. I ran downstairs to the living room and showed the letter to my mother. She hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I knew you could do it," she whispered. My father barely glanced at the letter, muttered something, and turned away. Ryan just shrugged, as if my getting into Harvard wasn't worth his attention. Harvard wasn't just a university, it was my escape. When I left La Jolla that fall, I felt like I was stepping into a new world. Cambridge, with its tree-lined streets ablaze with red and gold and its historic buildings, was the first place I felt I belonged. I chose to major in business administration, not just because it aligned with the future of medtech solutions, but because I wanted to understand how to run a company, how to turn ideas into reality. I wanted to prove I was more than the boy my father had rejected. At Harvard, I was like a fish finding its stream. I studied day and night, joined clubs, and worked part-time at the library to cover extra expenses. I didn't want to rely on my father's money, though he sent a small monthly allowance, always accompanied by reminders that I owed him for raising me. Those words only fueled my determination. I earned a full scholarship through my academic excellence, and that gave me a sense of freedom I'd never known. But even at Harvard, my father's shadow haunted me. Every time I called home, his voice on the phone was cold and critical. "What have you learned at that expensive school?" he'd ask, as if I were wasting time. Ryan never called, but I heard from my mother that he was growing increasingly reckless, partying all night and spending money lavishly. My mother worried about him, but she was powerless when my father always took his side. I could only comfort her, promising I'd return soon to help. My mother was the reason I never gave up. She sent handwritten letters every month, sharing small details about home, the flowers in the garden, or the new books she was reading. I still keep those letters carefully preserved. They were the greatest source of encouragement in my life. I stored them in a small wooden box, rereading them whenever I felt exhausted. "You are my hope," she wrote in one letter. "No matter how tough life gets, know that I'm always here." I didn't know those words would soon become my most painful memory. When I was 20, on a cold April day in Cambridge, I received the call that changed everything. I was in the library preparing for midterms when my phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number, but I answered. A trembling voice came through. "Kevin, this is a friend of your mother's. Something's happened." My heart stopped. The woman explained that my mother, Elizabeth, had been in a plane crash while traveling to visit me. The private jet she was on had malfunctioned shortly after takeoff from San Diego. There were no survivors. I don't remember how I dropped the phone or how I ran out of the library, tears streaming down my face. All I remember is the feeling that my world had collapsed. My mother, the only person who loved me, who believed in me, was gone forever. I never got to say goodbye, never got to tell her how much I loved her. All I had left were her letters, her memories, and an unfillable void in my heart. I flew back to San Diego that night, my mind blank. When I walked into the house, my father was sitting in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, his eyes red. Ryan stood in the corner, head bowed, but he didn't cry. No one greeted me. No one asked how I felt. My father just looked at me and said words I'll never forget. "If you hadn't asked her to visit, she wouldn't be dead." Those words stabbed through my chest like a knife. I wanted to scream, to punch him, but I just stood there, silent, letting the pain consume me. My mother's funeral was a lavish affair, true to my father's style. A performance to show the world how perfect the Lee family was. I stood by her coffin, staring at her portrait, feeling like a part of me had died with her. Ryan, in an expensive suit, showed up for a few minutes before disappearing with his friends. My father was busy shaking hands with business partners, as if my mother's death was just another event to manage. I was the only one who stayed until the end, clinging to her memories like a precious treasure. After the funeral, my relationship with my father deteriorated beyond repair. He blamed me, and I began to wonder if he was right. If I hadn't been at Harvard, if I hadn't let her come visit, maybe she'd still be alive. The guilt gnawed at me, but it also became my drive. I returned to Cambridge with a new resolve. I wouldn't let my mother's death be in vain. I would fulfill my dreams, not just for myself, but for her. The years that followed at Harvard were a grueling test. I studied obsessively, worked relentlessly as if only work could help me forget the pain. I graduated with near-perfect grades and went on to pursue a master's degree at Harvard. I stopped calling home, cut off contact with my father and Ryan. My mother's letters, now kept in an old wooden box, were my only source of solace. But the loneliness never left me. Every night, lying in my dorm room bed, I thought of my mother, her smile, her words. "You're stronger than you think," she had said. I clung to those words, using them to keep moving forward. I began building relationships with professors and classmates who would become key allies in the future. One of them was Charles Bennett, the father of a classmate, a wealthy investor with a keen vision. He saw potential in me, and I knew one day he would be the key to my bigger plans. When I graduated with my master's, no one from my family attended the ceremony. My father didn't call, Ryan didn't care, and my mother, the only one who would have been proud, was no longer here. I stood alone on the stage, accepting my diploma with a forced smile, but deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. My mother had taught me resilience, and I would use that resilience to face the challenges ahead. A journey that would lead me back to MedTech Solutions, where it all began, and where I would confront my father and Ryan. Not as a frightened boy, but as a man ready to fight. I returned to San Diego on a sweltering summer day, the California heat searing my skin, but it paled in comparison to the smoldering fire within me. My Harvard master's degree was tucked neatly in my suitcase, but it didn't bring the sense of triumph I had once imagined. Instead, I felt like I was stepping into an arena where my opponents were not just my father and Ryan, but also the painful memories of my childhood. MedTech Solutions, the company my father had built from nothing, was the place where I had once been called a bastard. Now I was returning, not to beg for approval, but to prove that I belonged here, whether my father wanted it or not. A call from my father came just weeks after graduation. I was in Cambridge, packing up my small apartment, preparing for a future I hadn't yet mapped out. The phone rang, and his voice came through as cold as ever. "Come back," he said without a greeting or a hint of warmth. "The company needs people. Don't think you're getting any special treatment because of that Harvard degree." I clenched my jaw, suppressing the anger rising within me. Part of me wanted to refuse, to cut all ties with him and the family that had cast me into darkness. But then I thought of my mother, her words echoing in my mind. "You're stronger than you think." If I walked away now, I'd be letting my father win, letting him continue to believe I was worthless. I couldn't let that happen. I took a flight back to San Diego, carrying a suitcase of clothes and a steely resolve. When I stepped into the headquarters of MedTech Solutions, I was struck by its grandeur. The glass building gleamed under the sunlight, its engraved company logo exuding modernity and power. This was no longer the small company I remembered from childhood, when my father would bring me to his office and tell me to sit still and don't bother anyone. MedTech Solutions was now a major player in the medical technology industry, with products like imaging diagnostics and surgical support devices used nationwide. But I knew that behind the glossy facade was chaos. My father's poor decisions, Ryan's laziness, and a company stagnating in the race against competitors. My father summoned me to his office on my first day. He sat behind a mahogany desk, his face stern, his eyes as cold and piercing as ever. Ryan stood beside him, now a 22-year-old in an expensive suit, his face radiating the same arrogance as always. "You'll start in product development," my father said flatly. "Entry-level position. Don't expect any favors." I nodded, saying nothing, though I knew he was deliberately putting me in my place. An entry-level job, while Ryan, who had barely graduated from a mediocre college and never worked seriously, was appointed director of the marketing department. I glanced at Ryan, who smirked as if my demotion was a great joke. "Welcome home, big brother," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Those first days at MedTech Solutions were a test. I was given a small corner desk in the product development department, where engineers and scientists worked tirelessly to improve medical devices. My colleagues, mostly older than me, eyed me with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. They knew I was John Lee's son, but they also knew he didn't value me. "You're Kevin, right?" an engineer named Maria asked on my second day. "Heard you went to Harvard. Why are you here in this position?" I gave a faint smile, avoiding an answer. I didn't want to explain, didn't want to share the scars etched in my heart. My job involved analyzing data from medical devices, suggesting improvements, and assisting the technical team on research projects. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. I enjoyed how numbers told their own stories, how each small improvement could save a patient's life. I worked hard, often staying late in the office long after the building had gone dark. I wasn't doing it to impress my father, but to prove to myself that I could make a difference. My father never noticed. In meetings, he focused only on Ryan, who showed up with ridiculous marketing ideas, like lavish ad campaigns without market research. "Ryan has vision," my father once said during a meeting, dismissing my proposal for a technical upgrade to a diagnostic device. "You just do your job well." His words no longer stung as they once did. I'd grown used to his contempt. But every time I saw Ryan with his smug smile and careless attitude, a quiet anger flared within me. He didn't deserve his position, and I knew I had to do something to change things. I started building relationships within the company. I ate lunch with the engineers, listened to their ideas, and learned from their experience. Maria, the engineer who spoke to me on my first day, became a close ally. She shared the company's internal issues, my father's favoritism toward Ryan, the financial missteps that had cost major contracts. "This company needs someone like you," Maria once said, "not Ryan." I smiled, thanked her, but I knew words alone wouldn't change the situation. Only action would. Meanwhile, Ryan lived like a spoiled prince. He arrived at the office late, left early, and spent most of his time partying or flaunting his lifestyle on social media. Once I overheard him talking to a marketing staffer. "This company's mine," Ryan said confidently. "Dad promised. Kevin's just a hired hand." I stood behind the door, fists clenched, fighting to keep my anger in check. He was partly right. My father had always wanted Ryan to inherit MedTech Solutions. But I also knew that if Ryan took over, the company would collapse. My relationship with my father grew increasingly strained. He never acknowledged my efforts, even though my suggestions saved the company millions. During one meeting, when I presented an idea for a new diagnostic device, he cut me off. "Don't waste time on unrealistic ideas. Focus on your work." I looked at him, his eyes as cold as they were when I was a child, when he called me a bastard. But now I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I knew I was stronger than that. One evening, as I worked late, Maria came into the room, her face tense. "Kevin, there's something you need to know," she said. She revealed that Ryan had convinced my father to sign a major contract with an unreliable supplier, lured by a personal commission. The deal could cost the company tens of millions if it failed. My blood boiled. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was about the future of MedTech Solutions, the legacy my mother had hoped I'd protect. I began quietly gathering information. I studied financial records, contracts, and the decisions my father and Ryan had made over the years. I realized MedTech Solutions was on the brink of danger. Competitors were outpacing us, and Ryan's incompetence only made things worse. I knew I couldn't change everything overnight, but I also knew I couldn't stand by and watch the company crumble. One night, as I sat in my office, looking out at San Diego's twinkling city lights, I thought of my mother. She had said I could do great things. I pulled out the old wooden box, opened her letters, and reread the words, "You are my hope." In that moment, I decided I wouldn't just work at MedTech Solutions, I would fight to take it. Not for my father, not for Ryan, but for my mother and for myself. The months that followed were a test of patience and perseverance. I worked tirelessly, balancing my regular duties with building a network of allies in the company. I knew I couldn't rely on my father, but I could rely on people like Maria and the other engineers who believed in my vision. I also began researching MedTech Solutions' share structure, how my father controlled the board, and the weaknesses in his management. I knew I'd need this information someday. Meanwhile, Ryan continued to cause trouble. He burned millions on failed marketing campaigns, and my father still defended him. During one meeting, I couldn't hold back and spoke up. "If we keep spending like this, we'll lose all our clients." My father glared at me, his eyes burning. "What do you think you know about business?" he snapped. Ryan laughed as if I'd said something absurd. In that moment, I realized that hard work alone wouldn't be enough to change things. I needed power, the kind of power my father and Ryan held. So I resolved to be patient. I needed a meticulous plan, a clear and detailed strategy for every step forward. But then, an unexpected event turned everything upside down. A truth I never could have anticipated, a secret that forced me to reevaluate my entire life. It was a gray October afternoon in San Diego, with rare rain pouring over the city. I was in my office reviewing data from a new diagnostic device when my phone rang. A nurse from the hospital spoke urgently. "Mr. Kevin Lee, your father, John Lee, has been admitted to the ER. He's suffering from anemia and just had a mild heart attack. We need a blood donor urgently." My heart tightened. Despite our fractured relationship, I couldn't abandon him. I rushed to the hospital carrying an inexplicable sense of unease. When I arrived, my father was in the ICU, his face pale, his eyes closed. Ryan was there, but he stood in a corner, scrolling through his phone, seemingly unconcerned. I looked at my father, the man who had been my childhood nightmare, now frail and vulnerable. I didn't know what I felt, anger, pity, or just emptiness. The doctor came in explaining that my father needed an urgent blood transfusion and asked if Ryan or I could donate. "I'll do it," I said immediately without thinking. Ryan shrugged, muttering something about not liking needles. But when my blood test results came back, the doctor returned with a strange expression. "Kevin," he said, his voice low, "your blood type doesn't match Mr. Lee's. Are you sure you're his son?" His words hit me like a bolt of lightning. I stood frozen, my mind reeling. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. The doctor shook his head, trying to explain gently. "Your blood type is B+, while Mr. Lee's is O. Genetically, you cannot be his biological son." The floor seemed to collapse beneath me. My father's words echoed in my mind as sharp as ever. "You bastard!" The times he hit me, the times he looked at me with contempt. Suddenly, it all made sense. He knew. He had always known I wasn't his biological son. But if he wasn't my father, who was I? And my mother, the woman who loved me unconditionally, was she truly my mother? Or was my mother someone else entirely? And most importantly, who was my real father? I left the hospital in a daze, as if the world had shifted colors. The rain soaked my shirt, but I didn't care. I drove home, my mind tangled with 1,000 questions. When I reached my small apartment, I sank into a chair, staring at the wooden box containing my mother's letters. I wanted to open them, to search for answers, but I was afraid. Afraid that the truth would shatter the cherished memories of my mother, of the love she had given me. The next day, my father was discharged. He didn't thank me for coming, nor did he mention the blood transfusion. But I couldn't let it go. I needed the truth. I began investigating quietly and carefully, so no one in the family would suspect. I contacted a friend from Harvard, now a lawyer, and asked him to help me access family medical records and personal documents. I also hired a discreet private investigator named Paul to dig into my parents' past. The weeks that followed were a blur of tension. By day, I worked at MedTech Solutions, maintaining a calm facade as if nothing had changed. But every night I pored over the documents Paul sent, piecing together fragments of the past. I discovered that my mother and father had married just months before I was born, a detail I had never noticed before. But what stunned me most was an old medical record Paul found in a San Diego hospital archive. It documented that my mother had been hospitalized a year before my birth with severe injuries from an assault. I read the report over and over, feeling like my heart was being crushed. It stated that my mother had been attacked by an unidentified group and had refused to provide details to the police. A sharp pain pierced my chest. My mother, the gentle woman who always smiled at me, had endured something horrific. Then a terrifying thought flashed through my mind. Was I the result of that assault? Was that why my father called me a bastard? I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were falling into place. My father's contempt, the way he always treated me like an outsider, and my mother's boundless love, it all had a reason. I sat in my apartment, hands trembling, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't crying for myself, but for my mother. She had endured that pain and still chose to love and protect me as if I were her most precious gift. I decided to confront my father. One evening, I went to his house, the La Jolla villa where I had once lived in fear. He was in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, as always. Ryan wasn't there, probably off partying somewhere. I stood before him, took a deep breath, and asked, "I'm not your biological son, am I?" The air in the room seemed to freeze. My father looked at me, his eyes darkening, but he didn't answer immediately. After a long, suffocating silence, he said coldly, "If you already know, why bother asking?" His words felt like a slap, but I pressed on. "Did Mom know?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What did she know about me?" He smirked, a bitter smile. "Elizabeth loved you more than anyone, but she never wanted you to know the truth. She said you were her son no matter where you came from." His words were both painful and liberating, like a knife cutting through me. I wanted to ask more, to know the details, but he stood up and turned away. "Don't dig into the past, Kevin. It won't change anything." I left his house, my mind in chaos. The truth that I wasn't John Lee's biological son explained everything. His hatred, his favoritism toward Ryan, and my mother's unconditional love. But it also left me at a crossroads. I could walk away, cut all ties with this family, and start over somewhere else. Or I could stay and fight for MedTech Solutions. Not just for myself, but for my mother, who had sacrificed everything to protect me. In the end, I chose to stay. I don't fully recall why I made that decision at the time. Perhaps it was a desire for justice. Maybe it was to make my father and Ryan pay for what they'd done. Or perhaps it was both. I'm not sure. All I know is that looking back now, I believe it was the right choice. I returned to work at my father's company as if nothing had happened. But in my mind, I had a clear plan, and the first steps were swiftly put into motion. At MedTech Solutions, I was still just a low-level employee, but I knew that position was a hidden advantage. No one paid attention to me. No one saw me as a threat. My father was preoccupied with high-level meetings, Ryan was engrossed in lavish parties, and I quietly laid the foundation for my takeover. I spent my time learning every detail of the company, from product development processes to financial contracts, from the list of shareholders to how my father controlled the board of directors. Every piece of information, no matter how small, was a part of the larger picture I was assembling. I continued nurturing relationships with allies, knowing I couldn't do this alone. Fortunately, my months in the product development department had helped me forge bonds with truly important allies. Maria, the lead engineer I had befriended early on, was the first person I trusted. One evening, when the office was empty, I invited her for coffee at a small cafe near the headquarters. Under the dim glow of yellow lights, I opened up to her, not about my origins, but about my vision for MedTech Solutions. "Maria," I said, my voice low but firm, "don't you see the company heading in the wrong direction? Ryan's decisions, my father's stubbornness, they're dragging us down." Maria looked at me, her eyes reflecting empathy. "I know," she replied. "I've been here 10 years, Kevin. I've seen this company when it was full of innovation, but now, it's like a sinking ship." She paused, sipping her coffee. "You have a plan, don't you?" I smiled, not answering immediately. Instead, I asked, "If I had a way to change things, would you support me?" Maria studied me for a long moment, as if weighing her options. Then she nodded. "If you can prove you're capable, I'll stand by you." That was the first step. Maria wasn't just a skilled engineer, she had influence among the technical team, and her support would sway others. I continued building my network of allies, but I was careful not to arouse suspicion. I ate lunch with engineers, listened to their frustrations, and memorized every detail about how the company operated. I learned that many were dissatisfied with Ryan, from veteran employees to mid-level managers. They were fed up with his reckless spending and baseless decisions. I never openly criticized Ryan or my father, but I let others voice their thoughts and I listened. Each conversation was another brick in my plan. The next critical step was strengthening my relationship with Charles Bennett, the father of my Harvard classmate. I had spoken with him a few times during my college years, and now I needed him more than ever. Charles was a seasoned investor with a portfolio spanning technology to real estate. He had a knack for spotting potential where others didn't, and I knew that if I could convince him, I'd gain a powerful ally. I flew to San Francisco to meet Charles at his office, a glass-walled room overlooking the bay. He greeted me with a friendly but sharp smile, as if he already sensed I was there for something significant. "Kevin," he said, "you're not the type to fly hundreds of miles just for coffee. What do you want?" I took a deep breath and laid out my plan. I told him about MedTech Solutions' struggles, my father's mistakes, Ryan's irresponsibility, and the potential the company could achieve if led properly. I shared details about the projects I was quietly developing, like an AI-powered diagnostic device that could revolutionize healthcare. "But to make that happen," I said, "I need to control the company, and I need you." Charles raised an eyebrow, but I saw curiosity in his eyes. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. I explained that I wanted him to invest in MedTech Solutions, but not publicly. I suggested he buy shares through a shell company to avoid my father's suspicion. In return, I'd provide insider information on the best times to buy, like when the company was about to launch a new product, boosting stock prices. "And when the time comes," I said, "I want you to back me in the boardroom." Charles tapped his fingers on the desk, silent for a moment. "You're playing a dangerous game, Kevin," he said. "If John finds out, you'll lose everything." I nodded. "I know, but if I don't act, the company will collapse under Ryan. I can't let that happen." Charles smiled, a mix of admiration and caution. "All right," he said, "I'm in. But you'd better keep your word." That was a turning point. With Charles's support, I began building a covert portfolio of shares. Each time MedTech Solutions was set to announce a new product or sign a major deal, I tipped off Charles. He bought shares through shell companies, and I received a portion under an anonymous identity. It wasn't a perfect plan, and I knew I was treading an ethical line. But I had no other choice. My father and Ryan would never willingly relinquish control, and I had to use every tool at my disposal to challenge them. My plan wasn't without risks. My father was a shrewd man despite his flaws. He kept a close eye on major shareholders, and I knew that if he suspected anything, he wouldn't hesitate to fire me, or worse. I had to be meticulous, covering my tracks and maintaining the facade of a loyal employee. Once during a meeting, my father suddenly questioned me about a financial report I'd prepared. "Why do you know so much about the company's shares?" he asked, his eyes probing. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "I just want to understand the company better, sir," I replied. "If I'm going to contribute, I need to know how things work." He stared at me for a moment, then nodded, but I knew he didn't fully trust me. Ryan, meanwhile, continued to cause trouble. Once he signed a $5 million advertising contract with an unreliable media company, simply because its CEO was his drinking buddy. The deal was a disaster, costing the company a major client. I seized the opportunity to document every detail, from email exchanges to financial reports. I knew Ryan's mistakes would be my weapons when the time came, but I didn't always stay composed. Some nights, alone in my apartment, the weight of loneliness pressed down on me. I thought of my mother, her letters, and wondered what she would think of the path I was on. I was playing a dangerous game, and sometimes I feared I was becoming a version of my father, cold, calculating, willing to do anything to achieve my goals. But then I remembered my mother's smile, her words, "You are my hope." And I told myself I wasn't doing this for power or revenge, but for justice. 10 years passed in the blink of an eye, but each day in that time was a battle. Looking back, I hardly recognize myself. The trembling boy from years ago has become a 36-year-old man, heading the product development department at MedTech Solutions, though still under the title of a low-level employee. But behind that humble facade was a meticulously crafted plan, a chess game I had played for a decade, with every move carefully calculated. MedTech Solutions, once a stagnating company, had become a giant in the medical technology industry, valued at over $1 billion. This success didn't come from my father or Ryan, but from the relentless efforts of me and the team I quietly built. The AI-powered early cancer detection project I initiated 5 years ago became the company's flagship product. With over 95% accuracy, this device was sought after by hospitals worldwide, from the US to Europe and Asia. Other products like robotic surgical assistants and remote health monitoring systems also bore my mark, though my father never acknowledged it. I worked day and night, not just to develop products, but to build a loyal team. Maria, my trusted friend and lead engineer, became my right hand. She led the technical team with dedication, and together we turned MedTech Solutions into a symbol of innovation. Other employees, from engineers to mid-level managers, began to see me as a true leader, even though my father and Ryan still held control. I never openly challenged them, but I knew each of my successes was an invisible slap to their arrogance. Meanwhile, Ryan continued to live like a spoiled prince. Now 32, he remained the director of marketing, but his achievements were nothing more than extravagant, ineffective ad campaigns. My father, now in his 60s, was still chairman of the board, wielding near absolute power. But I noticed he was slowing down. His stubborn decisions, ignorance of new technologies, and reliance on Ryan caused the company to miss numerous opportunities. Over the decade, I quietly built my power, not through bravado but through discreet moves. My partnership with Charles Bennett, the seasoned investor I knew from Harvard, was the cornerstone of my plan. Through shell companies, Charles owned 19% of MedTech Solutions shares, and I held 17%. It was a significant amount, but still not enough to overthrow my father, who controlled over 50% of the shares through long-standing relationships and loyal shareholders. So over those 10 years, I tirelessly built and maintained relationships with the company's shareholders. In informal meetings, I shared my vision for MedTech Solutions, a company leading the world, not just in profits, but in social impact. I spoke about the AI project, how it had saved thousands of lives, and how Ryan's mistakes had cost the company millions. "We need a leader who puts the company's interests first," I told Robert, a shareholder who had invested in MedTech Solutions from its early days. He nodded thoughtfully. "You're right, Kevin," he said. "John did well, but he's no longer suited for this era." Slowly, I gained the support of many smaller shareholders. They were fed up with my father's favoritism toward Ryan and his dismissal of innovation opportunities. I knew that when the time came, their support would be my greatest weapon. The opportunity finally arrived on a May day during MedTech Solutions' annual shareholder meeting. A week earlier, my father announced a major decision. He would step down as CEO and appoint Ryan in his place. The news spread like wildfire, and I heard murmurs of discontent from employees and shareholders alike. Ryan, with his unchanging smugness, had prepared a lengthy speech boasting about his achievements, failed ad campaigns, and damaging contracts. I knew this was my moment to act. Before the meeting, I met Charles at a discreet cafe in downtown San Diego. "Are we ready?" I asked, my heart pounding. Charles smiled, his eyes sharp. "You've done well, Kevin. We have 36% of the shares, and I've spoken to some smaller shareholders. They'll side with us." I nodded, feeling like I was standing on a precipice. This was the final chess move, and I couldn't afford to lose. On the day of the meeting, the conference room at MedTech Solutions headquarters was packed. Shareholders, from major investors like Robert to smaller stakeholders, filled the rows, their eyes full of anticipation. My father stood at the podium in an expensive black suit, still exuding authority despite his age. Ryan sat beside him, a smug smile on his face, as if his victory was assured. I sat in the back, quietly observing, but inside a storm was brewing. My father began his speech, praising Ryan as if he were a business genius. "Ryan has proven his capabilities," he said, his voice brimming with pride. "He will lead MedTech Solutions into a new era." A few shareholders clapped, but I noticed many others remained silent, their eyes skeptical. Then my father announced, "I propose Ryan as CEO, and I will transfer the majority of my shares to him in the future." The room grew tense, as if everyone was waiting for something to erupt. I stood up, my voice clear and resolute. "I object," I said, causing the entire room to turn and look at me. My father froze, his eyes burning with rage. Ryan laughed, but his smile quickly faded as I stepped onto the podium. "MedTech Solutions is on the brink of collapse," I began, my voice calm but weighty. "Ryan has made a series of disastrous decisions, from failed ad campaigns to contracts with unreliable suppliers. We've lost millions because of those mistakes." I pulled out a dossier, evidence I had collected over 10 years, from Ryan's emails to financial reports showing losses. I presented each detail, leaving no room for doubt. "Meanwhile," I continued, "our technical team has developed products that are transforming healthcare, like the AI cancer detection device. These are why MedTech Solutions is valued at over $1 billion today. But we cannot continue to let incompetent leadership steer the company in the wrong direction." My father shot to his feet, his face red with fury. "You dare stand here and challenge me?" he roared, his voice trembling with anger. But I didn't flinch. "I'm not challenging you," I replied. "I'm protecting this company, the company my mother believed in." Mentioning my mother made him pause, and I saw a flicker of pain in his eyes. But I pressed on. "I own 17% of MedTech Solutions shares," I declared, sparking murmurs in the room. "And I have the support of Mr. Charles Bennett, who holds 19% along with other shareholders." Charles stood, confirming my words. Robert and several smaller shareholders also voiced their support. The room buzzed with tension. Ryan panicked, stammering, You can't do this. This company is mine." But I didn't respond to him. I looked directly at the shareholders, outlining my vision: a MedTech Solutions leading the world, creating life-saving products, and a future unhindered by poor decisions. At the conclusion of my presentation, I formally proposed that the board vote to remove my father from his roles as CEO and chairman. Simultaneously, I moved to terminate Ryan's position as director of marketing. A tense vote followed. The conference room fell silent, save for the faint whispers of shareholders. Finally, after the votes were fully tallied, the secretary stepped to the podium to announce the results. I stood there, gripping the edge of the wooden table, striving to maintain a calm exterior despite my heart pounding as if it might burst. All eyes were on me, from Charles with his subtle smile in the front row to Robert, the veteran shareholder, nodding encouragement, and the smaller shareholders I had quietly persuaded over the years. But the gaze I couldn't tear myself away from was my father's. Those cold, piercing eyes, now tinged with shock and something I had never seen before: powerlessness. With a majority of votes, the secretary's voice rang out clear and emotionless. Mr. John Lee is removed from his positions as CEO and chairman of the board, and Mr. Ryan Lee is dismissed from his role as director of marketing. In their place, Mr. Kevin Lee is elected as the new CEO and chairman of the board of MedTech Solutions. The room erupted. Scattered applause mixed with murmurs of astonishment. Charles stood, raising a hand in congratulations. Maria, seated in the corner, beamed with a radiant smile, her eyes gleaming with pride. But I couldn't smile. I looked at my father, the man who had been my childhood nightmare, now rising from his chair, his face flushed with anger. His hands trembled as if he wanted to lunge at me and slap me as he had in the past, but he didn't. Instead, he just stared, his eyes burning with rage mixed with a pain I couldn't comprehend. Without a word, he turned and walked out of the meeting room, his steps heavy. The door slammed shut behind him, marking the end of his reign at MedTech Solutions. Ryan, seated beside him, looked like a trapped animal. His face was pale, his lips pressed tight, and his blue eyes, once the reason my father favored him over me, were now filled with panic. He stood, unsteady as if he might collapse, and shot me a glare full of hatred. "You'll regret this," he hissed, low enough for only me to hear. But I didn't respond. I stood there, watching him stumble after our father, his once arrogant shadow now small and pitiful. As the door closed again, the room exploded in applause. Charles stepped onto the podium, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Kevin," he said, his voice full of pride. Robert and other shareholders approached, shaking my hand and offering hopeful congratulations. But I didn't feel victorious. My heart pounded, not with joy, but with a strange emptiness. I had achieved what I wanted. I had toppled my father and Ryan, claimed MedTech Solutions. But why did I feel like I had lost something irreplaceable? That evening, I sat alone in the new CEO's office, the room that once belonged to my father. The large glass windows offered a breathtaking view of San Diego, where city lights twinkled like fallen stars. I swiveled in the leather chair, gazing out, trying to feel the pride I thought I should. MedTech Solutions was now mine, not just in name, but as a legacy I had saved from collapse. Over 10 years, I had transformed the company from a stagnating business into a billion-dollar giant, with products like the AI cancer detection device saving thousands of lives worldwide. I had proven I wasn't the bastard my father had called me, nor the worthless fool Ryan had mocked. But that pride was quickly overshadowed by a suffocating loneliness. I pulled the old wooden box from the desk drawer, the one I carried everywhere. Inside were my mother's letters, their pages yellowed but still carrying her faint scent. I opened one, rereading the familiar words, "You are my hope." Tears welled in my eyes, not from sorrow, but from a longing to hear her voice again, to know if she would be proud of me. I had done all this for her, for the love she gave me, for the legacy she believed I could protect. But now, standing at the pinnacle, I wondered, was this what she wanted? I thought of my father, his powerless gaze as he left the meeting. Despite the pain he inflicted on me for years, despite never seeing me as his son, I felt a strange pang watching him fall. And Ryan, the brother I once hoped would change, was now just a shadow filled with resentment. My relationship with my family, already broken, was now officially severed. I didn't regret what I had done, but I couldn't deny the cost. I had traded loneliness for justice. Under my leadership, MedTech Solutions entered a new era. I appointed Maria as Chief Technology Officer, giving her the freedom to lead innovative projects. We launched a series of cutting-edge products, from an upgraded AI device to 5G integrated remote health monitoring systems. Hospitals worldwide placed record-breaking orders, and MedTech Solutions stock soared, landing the company on the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. Shareholders from Charles to Robert called me the company's savior, but I never let the praise distract me. I knew that to maintain our lead, I had to keep working, keep learning, and never forget what my mother taught me: resilience and integrity. But every night when I returned to my modest apartment, where I still lived despite being able to afford a mansion, I faced the truth that my victory was never complete. I sat by the window, looking out at the city, reflecting on the years gone by. The long nights of struggling with myself, the times I nearly gave up, and the memory of my mother, the woman who gave me the strength to rise after every fall. I opened the wooden box, gently touching her letters, and whispered, "I did it, Mom. I hope you're proud." I knew the road ahead would still be fraught with challenges. My father and Ryan might never forgive me, and competitors would relentlessly try to outpace us. But I wasn't afraid. I had learned that true strength lies not in power or wealth, but in the ability to rise from the deepest pain. And with my mother's letters in hand, I knew I would never be truly alone.